Hello everyone, welcome back to the Quality Analyst. If you are learning software testing seriously, not just for interviews, but for real projects, then today's session is extremely important. In previous video, we understood what RTM is and why it is important. But today we will not stay in theory. Today I'm going to create a requirement traceability matrix step by step practically in Excel, exactly the way it is done in the real industry projects. So we will take a simple login scenario and I will show you how testers think, how they convert requirements into RTM, and how Excel is actually used in daily testing work. So keep Excel open, keep your notebook ready, and let's begin. So before we jump into Excel, let me clearly tell you what we are going to do in this session. By the end of this video, you will be able to understand the login requirement clearly, create test scenarios, create test cases, and finally map everything into a RTM using Excel. So this is not a shortcut video. This is a step-by-step tester mindset video. Now imagine you are working on a project and your business analyst gives you the following requirement. The requirement says the user should be able to log in using a valid username and password. If the credentials are invalid, the system should show an error message. Both username and password fields are mandatory. So this is a very common real-time login requirement. As a tester, before touching Excel, you must read and understand the requirement line by line. So now pause here. This is where many beginners fail. A tester does not blindly create test cases. A tester asks questions in mind. From this login requirement, I can already see a valid login scenario, invalid login scenario, mandatory field validation, error message validation. So this thinking is extremely important before creating the RTM. Okay, so now let us move to the Excel. In the real projects, RTM is most commonly created in Excel or Google Sheet, or also the test management tools such as ALM. Okay, open a blank Excel sheet. This sheet will now become our requirement traceability matrix. Okay, now the first question is, what columns should RTM contain? So in most real projects, these columns are mandatory. So in Excel, create these columns. First is requirement ID. So I will start from here. Zoom it a bit. Okay, so first is requirement ID. Requirement ID. And then second is requirement description. Requirement description. Okay, and then the third one is test scenario ID. And then the test scenario description. Test scenario description. And then the test case ID. Okay, and then the test case description. Test case description. And then you can add test execution status. And at the last, we will add defect ID. So again, this structure may slightly vary from company to company, but this is industry standard. And then you might see there are some columns getting removed or maybe some extra columns are getting added, but still some of this like requirement ID, requirement description, test scenario ID, description, test ID, these are the mandatory columns in the traceability matrix. Okay, now let us enter our first requirement, the login requirement. Okay, so first there will be a requirement ID. So let's assume the requirement ID is RQ, then login, and then 01. So this is our requirement ID, and then the requirement description. So I will just copy that and will paste it over there. The user should be able to log in using valid username and password. Okay, and invalid credentials should show error message. Username and password fields are mandatory. So I will just paste this here. Okay, and then maybe we can just wrap it. Okay, so this is our requirement. So always give clear and unique requirement IDs and never use any random names. Okay, now comes the test scenarios. So from this single requirement, I will create multiple test scenarios. For example, verify login with valid credentials. Okay, let me add it here. Okay, so first I will add the test scenario 01. Again, we should be mentioning the test scenario ID, and then we can add the, okay, sorry, I will just keep it here, and then I can add the description here. Okay, so verify login with valid credentials. Okay, and then I will add one more scenario, that is test scenario 2, verify login with invalid credentials. Then I will again add test scenario 3, and then I will add it like verify login when username is empty. And I will add one more test scenario, ts verify login when password is empty. Okay, so you can derive like lot of scenarios from this requirement, but yeah, like I, for the demonstration purpose, I will just keep it to 4 for now. So enter the scenario IDs and the description into the Excel, okay, from your side also. And notice one thing carefully, one requirement can have multiple test scenarios. So we have this one requirement, and we have derived 4 scenarios from this. Okay, now each test scenario will further have test cases. Okay, so now for example, for the test scenario 1, I can create one test case. Let's consider test case 01. Again, the test case will have ID, and these IDs will get generated from your test management tool itself. So you can mention those, or to start with, we can simply add something like TS01, 02, and for test case we can add TC01. Okay, so now under test case, like under this scenario 1, I will create test case 1, and that will be login with valid username and valid password. Okay, so valid username and valid password. So this is my one test case. Okay, similarly, like if you can find out any further scenarios like inside this test scenario 1, you can simply add that. Okay, and then now I will go to test scenario 2. So now from test scenario 2, I will derive some more test cases. Let's say TC01, TC02, sorry. Again, the ID should be unique for each requirement test scenario as well as the test ID, so that there will not be any ambiguity. So now login with valid username and invalid password. And then I can derive one more from this, because it is asking for invalid credentials. So I can add one more row here. You can simply add one more row, and then now I will give one more test case, TC03, and now I will keep login with invalid username and valid password. Okay, so I can add one more, like if both the username and password are empty, then I can add one more. Let's say TC04, login with invalid username and invalid password, or maybe you can say password. Okay, with invalid username and password. So again, you see, for one requirement we derived 4 test scenarios. From one test scenarios we have derived multiple test cases. Okay, and similarly, like I will add one more for test scenario 3 now. Okay, so login with empty username. So I will keep this as TC05, and then login with empty username. And similarly for test scenario 4, I will add tc06 and log in with empty password. Okay, so this is these are our test cases for each scenarios. So again, you can play with this and you can derive many more scenarios, many more test cases, okay, from the requirement. So this is where RTM becomes very powerful, and then now you see everything is connected from this. Okay, now look at your Excel sheet. You will see one requirement ID repeating, multiple test scenario IDs, and then multiple test case IDs. So if you want to do it, or maybe if you want to format it, you can simply format it. So let's say as the requirement login is 1, then you can simply merge this, okay, or else like this, just center it, and again the requirement is this. Okay, so the requirement login this, and then now you see for the requirement login 1, for test scenario 1 we have one test case, for test scenario 2 we have test scenario description here, and then we have different test cases from that. So again for that you can simply merge these cells and then you can format it. Okay, similarly I will merge these also. So instead of repeating, I think it's a good practice, or else you can simply write requirement like login this requirement ID in every row, and then that will also work. Okay, and now it is connected. Okay, so maybe we can just simply use some borders here. Let me wrap this. Okay, and then I can just center this, or maybe you can just center it, or maybe okay like this. So now it is clearly showing the mapping. So the requirement login ID, it has 4 test scenarios. For the first test scenario we have one test case, for the second scenario we have 3 test cases, for the third we have one test case, and for the fourth we have one test case. Okay, so this mapping is called as a traceability. If someone asks how many test cases are written for login, you can answer immediately using the RTM. You can simply say we have written 6 test cases for the login functionality. Okay, so again this is just for demonstration. If you want to derive some more scenarios or some more test cases, you can simply do that. Okay, so but this is just for the understanding purpose. Now during the execution phase, during the test execution phase, the testers update RTM further. The test execution status such as pass, fail, or not executed. Okay, so you can simply mark this as pass. Okay, if this is working as expected, then you can mark it as pass, then fail, then pass, something like this. Okay, or if this is deferred, you can simply mention deferred. Okay, if it is deferred to the next release, then you can mention the test execution status as deferred. Okay, so let's say for example, if this test case 2 is failed, right, then you can simply mention the defect as well. So you can mention the defect ID here. You can mention simply the defect ID. Let's say for example the defect ID is ID 1234. So this is the ID for my defect. Okay, so you can mention that in this defect column. So RTM now becomes a live project tracking document. Okay, so now understand the power of RTM. Using this single Excel file, you prove the requirement coverage, you track the testing progress, you answer client questions, and you support audits and UAT. So this is why RTM is not optional in real projects. Many beginners create RTM only for interviews, forget to update it, or create it at the end. So in real projects, RTM is created early and maintained continuously. So if you truly understood today's video, congratulations, you are thinking like a real tester now. If this video helped you, like it, share it, and subscribe to the Quality Analyst. Remember, a good tester doesn't just find bugs, a good tester proves coverage. Happy testing, and I will see you in the next session.